Good afternoon from here in ECIS London offices. Really happy to have you all with us. I'm Cam at ECIS. Today, joining us for this CANversation, we have Jeff Bradley from NEASC and the distinguished professor who you all know, Yong Zhao. He's world renowned for his work in education. Also, he's now an educational influencer. He's also the author of several books. And both these wonderful gentlemen will be at the ECIS NEASC conference this year. So we're so excited to continue working with them. Looking forward and thinking about what's happening globally, I'm really looking forward to reading your book, Yong, Teaching Students to Become Self-Determined Learners. So Jeff and I speak quite often with a conference coming up, and we talk about this all the time. So can you tell us a little bit about that book and why you wrote it?
Well, that was fast. I was hoping to have some general conversations to lighten this up, because it's like 5 a.m. My time. I got up at 4:30 just to meet you guys because I was looking forward to seeing you. But anyway, so I was just waking up, here's my coffee, but anyway, so I've been really thinking a lot about, over my almost 60 years of life, about what's missing in education. And if you look at education, we've really turned around a lot of things. I know from NEASC or ECIS, your schools may not necessarily be affected as much by government policies. But if you look in the US, in the UK, Australia, China, almost every country has done a lot of education reforms. But really, if you look at the data, nothing has really changed over the past 30, 40 years. You look at the PISA, look at NAEP. I don't trust those data as much, but that's the only indicator we have. So what happened to all this investment? What happened to all the changes in curriculum? What happened to the standardized testing? What happened to changes in pedagogy? What happens to teachers? You guys as educators to say, really, what did we do? I mean, if you think about this broadly, another thing is that if you look during COVID, the rise of hate, of hatred, the rise of hate crimes, look at the geopolitics, the tension between different countries. It seems like human beings have not learned at all to get used to each other, to be with each other. We're still kind of dominated by nationalism. How stupid can that be? We're still dominated by, we have to win others. I mean, this is really an interesting time to reflect. So I was thinking, what went wrong? I mean, well, nothing went wrong. Everything went right in that regard. That is, we followed what we think would be good. We redid our curriculum to say, oh, this is what you need, but nobody is really teaching truly at the system level what we need in the future. So there are really two big points, I think, about the book. One is that we really think students are the missing actors in education reform. All these reforms, we've changed the curriculum, we've changed teachers, we've changed testing, we've played with a lot of things, but students have not been the owners of their own learning or partners of change in education. And we still hold on to the old idea that if we prescribe something, all students will be homogenized and they can acquire all those skills and become successful. Today I was talking to someone, some of you may know King K, who led the 21st Century Partnership in the US. We're still talking about portraits of a graduate. If you look at every school, you're talking about what should our students do and know. You have a list of abilities, a list of behaviors, a list of knowledge, but is that the right way? I don't think so. I don't think all students need all of the skills in 21st century skills. I don't think all students can learn all those skills and knowledge at a high level. And I don't think it's necessary for all students to learn at that level. So how do you let students to follow what they can do, what they're passionate about, and how they can use their passion and their ability to create value for other people and the world is really the first big thing, a jagged profile of abilities.
Yeah.
The second point is that students need the time, the opportunity to develop their own ownership. They have to be responsible for their own learning. They have to be engaged for their own learning. You know, I've been doing research for this for a long time. Now I discover basically all motivational research skills from outside is actually valueless. There's no value because it's external evaluation unless students are engaged, are enjoying their autonomy, are enjoying, you know, the whole process of learning. There's very little value. Anyway, that's just a quick summary.
Thank you. So Jeff, we've talked about this quite a lot and at length about students having their own agency and thinking about what they want to learn, opposed to everybody going through the same funnel.
Right.
So we were talking yesterday or the day before about AI. You know, how can we do things that computers don't do? You know, and again, another one of your books, Yong, never send a human to do a machine's job. So what are we doing? You're saying we're homogenizing students, making them trying to be the same and get through the same exams. How do we step away and how do we get the students more involved?
I think one of the things that we lack today, among the things that Yong, you've pointed out, is imagination. And I think what might help some of the conversations on this topic of why and how did we get to where we are today and how do we do something about it within schooling is to use our imagination and go back about 150 years ago and say, how was systematized, organized schooling set up in the first place? And of course, it goes back way before 150 years ago, but starting around 1880, 1890 in the US anyway, and then that became a model for the world, we set up a really efficient school system that shortly in America and later elsewhere became compulsory, at least till age 14 or 16 and 18 in some places. And it had certain frames of reference, including IQ testing that came in and influenced how we think about school and how we articulate education all along the way. The imagination that we need today is the imagination that they had back then, which is we need to set things up so that these young people will be successful, knowing what we know about how the economy has shifted away from, you know, crafts and agriculture and farms to factories and cities and hierarchical organizations. So let's set up school to model the way our country and world increasingly looks. So the imagination we need today is, hey, it's 2021. We have, with COVID, one of the silver linings may be a chance to reset and push pause. Use our imagination and say, how do we now rethink the way young people ought to be prepared for their future? Now, notice I didn't say school either, because maybe school, we're realizing, at least the word we keep saying, is the problem. And we know that one of the obstacles to learning, ask any bored student, is school. So that's my point. To start with imagination, get a lot of people together, including parents, and say, how do we make this work better? And what we're going to talk about is the role of technology and AI and how the rapid pace of change makes for a challenging future, no doubt. Okay, we can start there with what is it that young people ought to be doing and where and with whom.
I think, let me just add to that. By the way, all of you, I know I noticed someone is from actually Vietnam, Hanoi. This is afternoon. You must be people who can imagine. I just want to follow up on Jeff's idea, because you are interested in imagine. Otherwise, why would you waste your time with us, you know, in the afternoon of beautiful London today? So I'm really imagining all of you really are interested in changes. You know, I was chatting with Jeff and Cam about if we don't change now, truly, there will be no future of change. That's just basically, this COVID has become such a huge drag on society, but a huge motivation to change. And this is the best time. And that change, I have heard a lot of people asking me, what can the system change? As the systems don't change, systems change, follow individuals. So this is the time for all of you to truly do something. As Jeff was suggesting, different. History is made by a lot of people, but a lot of individuals come out to lead this. I think all of you, I look at Paul. Paul, look at look at Paul Wood. He's like a big changer. Look at him. He has a finger on his nose. It's, oh my God, I'm going to change now. Well, I just know you because so I really want to encourage us to say, there's no good model. If globally speaking, who is doing what? So I have surrounded myself with probably hundreds of individuals who are making different changes. And they like to ask, who is doing this? I won't tell them, yes, there are a lot of people doing different things, but imagine in your own school, in your own community is key. For example, how do you liberate your students globally? With COVID, we have really truly proven online learning, global collaboration, remote learning is viable, is doable. Why don't we have more schools have students doing that on a daily basis, collaborating, doing projects, working together, working for each other, working with each other? Those are really important things that can happen.
And I think the pandemic has shown us that actually we need to be working more collaboratively. Nobody could sort the pandemic out in their own country and in their own little bubbles. So I think that's shown us. And also the pandemic is a great learning tool for young people. We've got so many things going on. We're at the pivot of, if we don't sort things out in the world, it will change forever. And actually, are we from now on going to live in disruption anyway? Is disruption going to be a continual thing? Those years of where we could just do everything the same and have those expectations that things wouldn't change. Has that changed? What are you finding in your schools? And just like Yong says, there's no experts for tomorrow, only about yesterday. So really, we've got to think about things ourselves and be more creative. The 4 C's are going to be so important for our students. Creative, collaboration, critical thinking, all those things are so important. So Jeff, did we talk a little bit about how important we thought all those things were? And also, let's make our students a little bit more innovative and thinking more entrepreneurial.
Right.
Are we helping them develop those things?
There's another C to add in there, which is actually, I think, somewhat of an obstacle. Actually, there are a few C's, but one that would be an obstacle, a few others that are obstacles. The one that I'm thinking of now is credential. Because credentialing is the function of school. When we ask what is school for, it's for a lot of things. We know that. As long as it serves that function of offering a credential, then the people receiving the credential, the universities, the employers, are going to have something to say about how students earn that credential and what it's worth. I think schools, and people on the call here can speak for this, are under the impression that if they mess with what happens in the years that students are in your care, it's going to affect the credential, which is really what school is for, so that students can go to the next thing. And I'm curious, Yong, your thoughts on the influence and power and grip that the credential has, whether it's a high school diploma, an IB diploma, ultimately a university degree. These are all things that, when we talk about reforming and changing and transforming education, we got to remember that it's all for an outcome that is a piece of paper that the world recognizes. So how do we affect what happens in school if what that leads to is some disruption in that ultimate output which is the piece of paper, that other C that I talked about, credential. I don't know if you've got thoughts on that. You've probably written about that before.
Well, I did write about that actually. So I was looking at the history. It's kind of interesting. First of all, when Cam was talking about 4Cs, all this, I still don't believe, 4Cs can apply to all students.
No.
When you have expectations, you have the what I call bottom expectations or floor expectations. Yes, all students should have some level of that. But ultimately, you want students to be great in something. For example, you get a Steve Jobs, who is really creative, but really doesn't like to talk to people. His communication may be lacking in different ways, So, but the other C, the credential is actually quite fascinating to look at. Today, basically in the US, nowhere else, or Australia, maybe I'm in the UK, college degree is hugely inflated, right? I mean, you look at everybody has a college degree. And then we kept sending these poor kids into college. And so in the end, there will be of no value. So another thing that's coming up is that Google and other organizations are trying to prop up new credentials to say, what, post-secondary school, what can you do to gain that? But my interest is really in this, since Jeff was talking about history. Remember, all of these credentials were manufactured by human beings. If they are manufactured, then they can be undone by human beings. I mean, look at IB. IB's been there for how long? Again, many people may still remember pre-IB time. And then if IB was made, can you not make another IB? And the same thing with in the US, AP, College Board. Look at the SAT and ACT, all the tests. They're kind of been suspended in many ways. And many universities now, universities in Melbourne and Kansas work for 2 universities at least, and they are struggling as well. How to change themselves to be valuable to students globally would be something really interesting. And so what I actually, when Jeff was talking about that, I want to invite all of you to consider, if you have a student who is really good at doing things, not necessarily credentialing, is that valuable. And if you get 300 students who each and every one of them knows their strength, they're creating value, they may be delaying college for 1 year, maybe they're getting a college degree online, or maybe they are working towards their own credentialing, what would that be? I think this is the time to really rethink about how do we remake. How can we change? And I'm here because many of you are serving students of a different population. You are from different schools, but maybe it is in your schools you can provide the opportunities that students can liberate themselves. I noticed that this is the time to have young children, to have children to be their own boss, to learn from each other, with each other. I think this is a new time to rethink. And I mean, actually, I was talking to Cam, I was really unhappy with the educational reforms in England. I think England's education change has gone really crazy. It's a very, very strange way. But I said, because England you're supposed to be leading. You led in 2 centuries ago, a century and a half ago. But can England continue to lead? You need the citizens. The citizens come out of our schools to have that confidence, to have that leadership, to have the imagination of the future, as Jeff was talking about. That will lead. It's not really completing this course, that course, getting this certification, that certification. So it's time to rethink all of those.
I mean, we talked at length about that as well. The fact that no one curriculum suits every single child, it just can't happen. One of the really great questions we've just got in the chat box is from Yannicka. What about the parents? And we've talked at length about this as well. How can we change education if the stakeholders, the parents, don't see what we need and the changes that we need? So we had a really interesting conversation about this. So should it be more student-led? So the students, rather than us trying to say to the parents, we think that the future generations need this, Should it be their own children going home and saying, actually, do you know what I really want to learn, or what I think I should learn, what I'm really good at is this? How can we do that? Do we let the children be the voices? So do we take everything back down to the student? You know,
I won't jump in on that one because Jeff can come in. I'm actually writing something about that. You know, in the developed countries, we're always talking about how parents can help children. We're always expecting parents should do this, parents should do that. But I want to bring the idea about in developing countries. I come out of a small village in China, but in many developing countries, like northern Thailand, Vietnam, actually some of rural areas in Vietnam, when we did research on this, children were the innovator. Children were bringing the knowledge back to their parents. They were the drivers of change, of how to grow rice, how to bring, where to buy water buffalo. That's in my life. Also, even in the UK, in the US, children of immigrants are always the connector between the family and the mainstream society. So how do we, let's not rely on parents, let's make children the change makers. They can lead into the future. There are always some parents who will resist, but those are the people we don't want to spend time with. We want to spend time with those who are willing to change, who are willing to force forward. I would love to see young children, 13, 14-year-olds today, leading their parents into a different future. You look at, again, the pandemic or the global tension, globalization have changed a lot. I don't think that message is got back to parents. I think children can be the change maker.
I would agree, and I think part of the challenge we have with our system of schooling is it tends to hold students back, and it tends to, and this is a cultural, societal thing, at least in America, tends to infantilize everybody, actually, even adults, in the way that the culture speaks to children and limits the sort of prospects that they have. And I look back at history at some of the examples of what were young people doing, including before there was compulsory schooling. A lot of them were kind of self-made, figuring it out and learning how to do things. And I was last weekend visiting our kids in Washington, D.C. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon last week, so we went to the National Portrait Gallery, which I'd never been to. And it's a fascinating place to go with a lot of really interesting stories, one of which I focused in on was that of David Farragut, who was a Navy admiral for his career. The portrait of him was him in his mid-60s, but it recounted that he started in charge of a ship when he was 12 years old. Now, how do you do that? You do that by not being told you have to sit still and be quiet and get your homework in on time and all of that. So you see, he was allowed, as have many other people who have been influential in life, to be an agent of his own learning and not to be limited by what others were saying and doing and thinking about him. I think, by the way, parents do play a critical role in the development of kids. There's no doubt, and it's presumptuous of any of us to say school is going to do the job that parents can't do. I think we at our peril take on all the role of the parent when we're educating kids. They have to be partners, ideally, and I know some are not capable of doing that. And it was one of the threats to the formation of compulsory schooling, that you were breaking up the family and you were taking the family learning experience out of the lives of children, and the state was taking over. And it was another era, but there's echoes today of, that's socialism. You're taking over the whole country with this concept. So I think, today the question is, how can those parents work as partners to the extent that they can support the child's journey more, I would say, unfettered, unleashed than it is today, with the tight leashes that parents and in some ways that schools place on kids. I'm all for a more liberated experience of learning for kids.
Paul, I noticed that you just put something quite lengthy in the chat box. Would you like to share it with us?
Thanks, Cam. Yeah, I was just commenting a little bit of a observation around credentials. You know, I missed the days of, I spent 11 years leading high schools with US programs where, in hindsight, I realized that you could dress anything up as an English course. You could dress anything up as a whatever you call it course in order to meet those graduation requirements. And we were able to work in Beijing, especially. And I remember chatting to Yong around that era. We introduced student-led courses, an elective course called the Passion Project, all kinds of things, which in hindsight, I appreciate that ability to do it covertly, because I also realized that parents, you know, I was so convinced I was an articulate and visionary leader that I wanted to tell parents about it all the time. And I really should have just kept my mouth shut and done it and left the labels as they were, so that the parents weren't unhappy and the kids just had a fantastic experience. So that was part of my comment there. And just, I love the school I'm in now, but I do miss that autonomy. And I'm guessing that many of you are at standalone international schools. I'm proud to be at the only UK state school that's an ECIS member, thanks to Cam. But it is quite different. We have to work trying to achieve systematic change. And I wonder if later in my career, I'll head back to one of those lovely, well-resourced standalone schools where you really have no excuse not to do things in an exciting way. They have thrown the gauntlet down.
And I'm ready on the comment on Paul's that I don't want to encourage you guys to lie, but I want to encourage all school heads to pay attention to students instead of the curriculum. I've traveled in too many schools. I mean, all their planning, their PD has to do with the curriculum. How do we teach this? You know, how do we make sure we get all this? That's first of all doing really an impossible task of teaching all students. It's impossible to homogenize. You know, you are going to have this, you know, diversity in this. Second of all, a lot of times, if we reflect on this, again, I was working with a school in Hong Kong, you know, and a bunch of schools in Australia. You ask the teachers, many teachers will tell you, really, during COVID, when you had to do remote learning, you don't have to teach as much. You thought, you know, I had to teach this, I had to teach that, but really you don't. You know, a lot of teaching is wasted. Why do you want to do that? So I've been thinking a lot about how each school, each teacher, we really are growing children. We are human educators. We're not implementers of other people's courses. The highest order really for every one of us is to look at your child. Are you liberating them? Are they become a leader? Are they become someone they want, and they would promote social changes in all those kind of things. So I think a lot of the courses really actually can be, you can do whatever you like in many ways. And of course, you will have the conservative, the traditionalists say, we got to teach this, you know, to think about English, you know, 8th grade English, you got to read this novels. If you didn't, what happens to you? If you read another 5 novels, would that really change your life that much? You know, another thing, you know, algebra 2. Do you really need algebra 2? And if you didn't do algebra 2, what happens to your life? You know, so that, I mean, really, we need to think about a lot of things. You know, many schools force children to do a lot of things that's unnecessary. So I'm really inviting all of us to ask the question, why do we do certain things? You know, a lot of times we sacrifice children's happiness and engagement and motivation by saying, you have to finish this. If you didn't, you know, this will happen. It doesn't happen like that. So that's, I think all of you are human educators, not instructional machines. So I think our attention should always be, does this help this child grow? And also, not every moment matters. You know, actually, I should say this. You know, I've been reflecting on my life a lot. You know, let me just share it with you, this private story. My father is passing away. He's in his 90s. So, you know, many people say, oh, your life must have been affected by your father. So yeah, maybe. I used to agree. He's lying in bed in the Chinese village. He probably is going to die today or tomorrow. But I said, okay, what happened to my brother? My brother is 10 years younger, had a better life, the same parents, the same school. He didn't even finish 3rd grade. He just dropped out. I said, so every corner matters, but you know, every child has probably thousands and tens of thousands of opportunities to do well or not do well. So how do we create a better pathway for all these people? And so that's really what my point is, in jumping into say Paul's point, to say the curriculum may be important, but may not be that important, that it's worth sacrificing the child's motivation, the child's intention, and the child's growth.
Yeah.
I would just add, as you're talking about what really are damaging potential effects on children, it's no wonder that we have a bit of a crisis of well-being, and so much talk of the importance of well-being in schools, because schools, as we've set them up, are not necessarily designed to promote the well-being of young people, ironically, and we're now paying for that, and we're reforming and rethinking how we structure the lives of young people in our care. I think if you take the lens back and you say, well, what about the planet? We have to say, well, we've got another issue to be mindful of, where we're seeing another type of crisis. Yeah. And I'm not talking about the geopolitical crises, but there are those too, but that of climate change, that whether it's inevitable or not, it is happening and it is changing, and we need to adapt to that. And it's most likely, scientists tell us, a result of us and choices we've made and systems we've built up. And we're now at a critical point. And we're saying the same thing about schools, that the systems we've built have created a moment now where we say, things are really bad. What happened? Well, what happened was a lot of choices made along the way, and a lot of perverse incentives that have gotten us to this point. But wait, am I talking about schooling or about the planet and climate? Talking about both. Yeah. So this is the moment to stop and reset and rethink and say, okay, we have a chance. And it's maybe overstating it a bit to say a once in a lifetime opportunity. And the window is relatively short because of the things that we've learned over the last 2 years, and we'll continue to learn, I say, over the next 6 to 12 to 18 months, of some malleability and flexibility in the system. Just last week, the NCAA, which is one of the systems in America that creates a very strict mindset about what the high school diploma must include and look like, said, we no longer, or at least we recommend, this task force said, we no longer recommend SAT and ACT to be required for college admissions. And we know fairtest.org has something like 1,500 higher educational institutions now that are test optional. That's one of those openings in the system for us to say, okay, this is our chance to say, hey, you don't have to get all stressed out about a final high stakes test at the end. So let's design in reverse now and say, what can we do differently in our schools to lead to healthier, more thriving, positive, engaged, self-directed learners that are not preparing ultimately for a standardized test through the College Board. College Board, one of those other C's that I said is an obstacle. And now it's not. So here's our invitation. And I know many of you are looking at ways of creating change that will be lasting and more sensible. One little example that I'll share is through COVID with remote learning, many of our teenagers were sleeping later in the morning and feeling better. Well, guess what? We've known for many years that teenagers don't do well in the morning, the same way people in their mid-50s like me and Yong don't do well late at night. Yong does very well at 5 in the morning, by the way. But science was always saying that to us. Now, this past year and a half actually showed us, oh yes, it actually does do kids well to sleep later in the morning. And with online learning, maybe we can change and rethink when they learn and how they learn. So we have openings here, and I just look forward to more schools taking advantage of those.
Let me just add something to say, schools, how schools hurt kids. So recently, and there's a new organization out of Lancet, the medical journal. So they've been organizing a Lancet commission for adolescent health. They did a report several years ago, but they really did not even include educators. So now this time they came to me to say, can you talk about this? So I'm on this commission. It's actually fascinating how health workers are trying to describe the health and psychological well-being of children without thinking about schools. It's really interesting. So they think about schools as a platform for them to teach health information. So I just kind of did some presentation. I said, schools, like, we do a lot of hurt. We damage our kids, So this is one interesting thing. We get health people coming in. I hope they can, I'm actually working with them. I'm on the commission, so we can, maybe in 2 years, we'll produce a big report. We want to produce one specific report about schooling and education. Another thing is actually was also interesting, neuroscience. So like Stanford Medical School is asking me to make a presentation about children learning. It's really interesting. So I see the medical profession come into education, hope to change it. Because many of you know technology, the technology community has always tried to change education, but they've not been very successful. They create new schools, create new possibilities. So I think now education is a very interesting place. From outside, very few people understand how we work. So all of you guys have tremendous expertise that can lead the change, but that change maybe coming from different directions. Another piece of news I've discovered in Australia, there's a rise in interest in homeschooling children. So this is happening in the US as well, because parents are finding new ways of educating their children and connecting their children globally.
Thank you. Shireen, I just wanted to bring you in because you popped something really interesting in the chat about how need also drives education. So again, education is not the same everywhere in the world. In different countries, there's different needs. Do you want to speak to us and tell us what you meant?
No, it was just, hi everybody. I'm in Switzerland here, assistant principal at an IB school. And we have developed a universal learning program actually that is very much in keeping with having, children leading learning, etc. But I think sometimes we think about things in a perfect world. If you don't have the things that we're talking about in the education systems that we're used to, for example, in our situation, some of the choices are made for us because of needs that we have. And that drives the learning. If you need to be able to, walk however many miles to go and collect water for your family every day, then you find a way that you have to do it because there's people depending on you. That's the only, point I was trying to make. Sometimes I feel like that we're not thinking about some of the contexts in which we should be thinking about.
So you talked a little bit about your program as well. So what does your program do that's slightly different maybe?
I mean, we do talk about conceptual learning quite a lot. The fact that learning competencies, skills, knowledge, etc. is very important. But there's a huge ethical element to it, and there's a huge global citizenship element to it, and there's a huge element where children are actually, I don't think children should be deciding what they're learning, but I think they should definitely have a massive voice in it, because they don't know as much as people who have maybe gone through life. Sorry, it might not be a popular thing to say, but I think adults do have contributions to make.
or is it a community educate? You know, everybody has a contribution to make.
Yeah, and I think in some areas children definitely would be leading, but we don't want to, you know, the whole point of having a more knowledgeable other beside you is quite important, I think.
Yeah, but do we bring
Sharon, I
different?
think they are. Let me just. I don't think have children lead their own learning is to discard adults. It's actually to make adults more relevant and more important. And you know, we always have this belief about what can we do with children if we assume them as the one who is responsible of their own life, then they can make better arrangement of adults. Adults can always help, you know, like, you know, we can try to tell them what to do, or we can try to make them ask us what they want to do. So that's two different stories, right? You start by telling, or you start by creating opportunities so they would have to rely on the knowledgeable adults. Yeah, I think that's different. So I just want to add that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a fair point. We do have philosophy for children, which is one of the tools that we use actually to, you know, basically support what you're saying, Dr. Zhao. Thank you.
One thing I want to say, and there was a comment in the chat about accreditation and how that becomes in some ways like the credential. It's the thing you work toward, ignoring what you actually should be doing toward that is in support of your values. In terms of accreditation, and I work with an accrediting organization, we think about this and talk about this all the time. How is it that we can be used as a positive lever for schools to do the kinds of things that we believe schools should be doing in this day and age? And that's a ongoing topic of conversation. How do we remain relevant, and how do we not just affirm status quo of organizations that are trying to change, are trying to evolve, are trying to rethink the role, as we've just been saying here, of the teacher, for example. We wouldn't say this in our writing necessarily, that we are in favor of sidelining the teacher, but on the sideline is where the coach is. And we do like schools that view teachers as coaches. Some of the schools that we work with, that we accredit, they don't call them teachers, they call them accompanying adults. Another school calls them learning designers, and intentionally not using the word teacher. And those are moves in that direction of saying we need to rethink the role of the adult in the life of the children when they come into school. Not putting them out entirely, no, because I mean, why are we paying them all this money? That's what schools cost. The personnel costs are the largest part of the budget for a reason, because there is a role, and a critical role for adults, but it needs to be rethought. And part of the rethinking, and Yong, I've heard you say it before about the role of algebra as an example. Is that really what we should be paying adults to do when they show up for work every day with a classroom full of students, is teaching them algebra? We need to ask some hard questions about the value of certain elements of the curriculum versus putting teachers in a slightly different position as those facilitators of personalized growth for students that is appropriate for each child.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Chris. Nice to see you.
Hi, Cam.
Hi. You've been putting some really great comments in the chat. So I invite you into the conversation too.
Thank you, Cam. Yeah, I've been struck by a couple of comments that people have made. And Paul reminded me of something that we tried to set up in one of our schools, which was actually very successful, which we called Passion Pursuits. And it was based on the thinking that, I've worked in all through IB schools, and it was based on the idea that, what do children learn best in the PYP, and what do they remember most? And it's the exhibition that they do at the end of their PYP program. And what's the thing that the students learn best and remember most from their MYP, and it's their personal project. Yeah. I'm not quite sure if it's the same for the diploma, if the extended essay is the thing that they remember most, but it's certainly the thing that they become experts at. And allowing kids to follow their passion, allowing students to follow their passion, and actually allowing learners to follow their passion, because I would include teachers in this as well. And teachers should be allowed the opportunity for more self-directed learning. So creating spaces where, you need to create different kinds of spaces. You need to create time, which are a time space. I think it's also useful to create digital spaces where people could share projects. And you need to create a space for sharing the outcomes of these kinds of projects. Now, the passion pursuit structure that we set up, and this was across 9 schools in a group of schools, was creating, first of all, time on the curriculum and a significant amount of time. The students to go onto a platform with an idea, try and get other people who might want similar ideas to join them in a project, develop a project, and keep it online so that people can see it and comment on it. So there's an element of kind of crowd participation and assessment in it. And keep sharing the product as they go through, and actually really try and allow them to develop a finished product. So it's a kind of elaborate personal project. We found that to be very successful, and one thing sticks in my mind called the Brain Food Project that a group of kids did across 4 schools. Fantastic. And then applying that to teachers, creating the same kind of space, the time, the platforms for sharing, the opportunity for them to find their passion, do some research, take some action in their classroom, and then show the impact that that's having on learning. And one of the most important aspects of it is about sharing, and sharing the impact that you're having. And those 2 structures really developed enduring learning in a very successful way.
Thank you so much, Chris. You know, and coming back to what Jeff said as well a little while ago, you know, the learning that in schools has to go side by side what's happening globally. That's really the only way forward. We shared an article, and I'll put it in the chat box, that Jeff shared with me in The Guardian about what's happening in the world. So, you know, moving forward in education as well, getting our kids and ourselves used to constant disruption. We're about coming to the end of this, so I'll invite you all to share your last thoughts before we wrap up the conversation. Yong.
Well, I was just happy to have a great morning with you, because typically I would be having my nightmare about my math exam in China. I was not joking. It took me about 50 years to get rid of that recurring nightmare of my exams. I'm not serious in China. So the damage can be very, very deep and really lasting a long time. So, but you know, I think I stopped about 5 years ago. It might come back again because of this conversation with all of you. And so, but thank you very much. Again, I just want to leave with one way of thinking, is that we never get our children ready for the future. The future is not there waiting for them. We get our children ready to create a better future. And remember, their future is our retirement. So we'll be careful. Okay, if they can create a more peaceful, more prosperous retirement, we'll live a happier life. If we leave them to create a mess for us, I don't think you like that. Okay, so we want to make sure you look at your children. They are your retirement, a better, more prosperous, more peaceful place. So we never get them future ready. We get them to create their future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Jeff, do you have anything to add before we wrap up for this afternoon?
Well, let me just say thank you, Cam, for this opportunity, and thank you, Yong Zhao, for this opportunity to be with us today and to give me an opportunity to engage with some of these really important and critical ideas. This has been a really productive hour, and I think what's been identified are some of the exciting opportunities that we have as people involved in education with certain, you know, levers in the case of accreditation, and for some of you in the case of leading schools, and some of you in the case of teaching children. but we can't ignore that there are obstacles. There are challenges to what we are up against. College admissions being one of them, parental attitudes being another. I think as long as we continue to do this work together and in collaboration, finding common ground, exploiting opportunities when we see them and when we find them, we need to keep at this work, because the change, I think, will come, but it will only come when people like you all on this call and the numbers of people behind us that are not on the call but share some of these same ideas, are all pulling in the same direction. And we're really fortunate to have people like Yong Zhao who write about these things, who give us a common text to look at. You know, our books, our schools are very book oriented, aren't they? They're all about the word and learning things out of books. And some of those books, Yong, that you've written, including most recently, but going back to your early days, yes, that's right. That's one of them. I've got another one here somewhere. But those are important volumes to give us some common language on how to address these issues, and also how to inspire the imagination. And I would, again, go back to that idea. If you want to have a conversation with your colleagues about why and how we should rethink how we're doing things, talk about imagination, because to me, that is the most powerful fuel that we have as humans to reshape and rethink systems that we're living in. Thanks,
Thank
Cam.
you, Jeff. So I would just disagree slightly with Jeff there. So I think books are great because they're for your imagination and they help us be creative. So maybe read some fun books too, Jeff. And
come to next month's book club, right, with ECIS.
Absolutely, yeah. So we are running a book club actually, and we look forward to seeing many of you at our leadership conference where we can discuss these conversations further. But actually, one of the things, being a former teacher and speaking to teachers quite a lot every day, the main thing we want for our children is for them to be happy and healthy, and for the world to be happy and healthy. And that's what we need to think about when we're thinking about where we are and where we want to go. At the moment, we're going through a transition. So if you look at Bridges' transition model, we've come to an ending. Hopefully, COVID will end, and then we'll be in a neutral zone where we can think about things differently and change things. And then we'll have new beginnings, things that we can think about differently. But don't rush through that neutral zone, because apparently that's uncomfortable for people and we all want to rush and get to the new bit. But let's really think carefully about what we want, and keeping in mind what we really want. We're parents and we're with young people all the time. We really want them to be happy and healthy, and everything else would be a bonus. Well, wonderful to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. All the best. Bye.